Hello, today we're going to talk about ratios. This is the beginning of our newest unit on ratios and proportions, Unit 2. Your topic for today's notes, which the notes go on page 59 and 60. Your topic is ratios, and your essential question is, how do I demonstrate a ratio in 3 different ways? The standard for this lesson is 6 ratios and proportions 1. And looking at your notes, you'll notice that there are some words it says. It says identify, write, compare. So your standard for today is that you should be able to understand the concept of a ratio and how to identify a ratio, compare or write a ratio, and compare a ratio. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to identify a ratio. We're going to identify a ratio, and I'm going to make this slightly bigger for us to see what we're doing here. And you'll notice in this circle that I have 2 shapes. I have stars and I have circles. We're going to look at the relationship between the stars and the circles. And the question is, what is the ratio? I'm going to circle the word ratio because that is a big idea, concept that we need to know. And the ratio of stars to circles. So we're going to find the ratio of stars to circles. We're going to find the relationship between the stars and the circles. And to do that, we first need to figure out how many stars are there and how many circles are there. Class, how many stars are there?
3.
And how many circles are there, class?
2.
Correct. 3 and 2. So making sure we go in the order. This is key to doing ratios. You want to make sure you're doing it in the order that they ask. They ask for stars to circles. They don't ask for circles to stars. That makes a big difference. So we're going to say we have 3 stars. There are 3 stars for every 2 circles. There are 3 stars for every 2 circles. And I'm actually going to write this in there. There are 3 stars for every 2 circles. So that's your relationship, and that's how you identify a ratio. Now, if it had asked for circles to stars, you could have said there are 2 circles for every 3 stars, but we are doing it the other way. Okay, the next thing it asks us is to write a ratio. And a ratio can be written in 3 different ways. Now, if we look at our relationship that we just had with the stars to circles, there are 3 different ways to do it. We can first write it as a fraction. And that looks like 3 over 2. We can also write it using a colon. And that would be 3 colon 2. And the final way is we can write it with the word 2. 3, 2, 2. You need to know how to write the ratios in the 3 different ways. Just remember fraction, colon, the number or the word 2. So far it's pretty easy, right guys? Okay. The next one is we're going to compare our ratios. So to compare our ratios, and I should have circled this because we made the first one fancy. And I can box this one. We're going to compare them. To compare ratios, you're going to write them as a fraction. And when you get that fraction, so you're going to have 2 ratios that you're going to compare next to each other, and you're going to simplify them or change them so that they have a common denominator. So for example, if I have the ratio 3 to 8, and I wanted to compare it with 1 to 4, and I want to know which one is bigger. So I'm going to put that box there to figure out which one is bigger. I'm going to write them first as a fraction, so I would put 3 over 8 and I would write 1 over 4. So I just took the first number and then put it as the numerator, the second number as the denominator, the first number as the numerator, the second number as the denominator. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a common denominator. What is a common denominator between 8 and 4? Angel.
The common denominator between 8 and 4 is 8.
Correct. 8 would be the common denominator. It's the least common multiple between the two. So I would have 8 and 8. Now, this fraction would stay the same because the denominator is the same. But this one, I need to make it into the fraction. It's 4 1/4. So now if I'm going to have an 8, how would I make that into a equivalent fraction, Lane?
You would multiply it by 2.
So I would say 4 goes into 8 2 times, so whatever I do to the bottom. So 4 times 2 is 8, 1 times 2 would be 2. So now that I'm looking at this, I have 3 eighths and I have 2 eighths. 3 pieces of the eighths, or 3 of 8 pieces, and then 2 of the 8 pieces. Which ones would be bigger, class?
3.
So this one is bigger, therefore this is also bigger. So all you have to do is find common denominators and then compare them. Whichever numerator is bigger is going to be the one that's going to be bigger. That would be your bigger ratio. Okay? All right. Final thing that we need to know about our ratios is that there are 3 types of ratios. So if you look over here, I've got suns and I've got moons, okay? That's what we'll call them. Or how about I say, yeah, we can do suns to moons, why not? So I have 3 suns and I have 2 moons. All right? So I could write this, I have the relationship of suns to moons. Suns to moons would be a ratio that is a part to a part. Because you'll notice these are all, if I want to say suns to moons, they're all like celestial units, or they're all, you could say they're shapes. So if I wanted to do like circles to stars, they would be all shapes. It's all different, all together you would have like different shapes. But if we individualize them, we would have suns to moons. So this would be what we would call a part to part ratio. We're taking a part of what we have and comparing it to another part. So that's the first one. And we're going to say this is the first one. The second one is a part to the whole, or part to whole. So it would be like if we were to call these, let's call them now this time, circles to stars. So we would say we have circles to all shapes. So I have 2 circles to 5 shapes total. So it would be 2 to 5. Now remember up here when we did the part to part, when we said these were moons to stars, or suns to moons, we would have 3 to 2. This was a part of the whole thing to another part of the whole thing. This is a part to the whole thing. And then the final one, third one, would be a whole to part. So we're going to flip what we did the last time. So instead of saying that we have 2 moons to 5 shapes total, we could say that we have not the stars. I was trying to do the last one again. We would have all shapes to stars. So we could say we have 5 shapes total to 3 stars. So it's all just different ways to represent the data that we have and what we're comparing. So you need to remember, going back through this, that a ratio talks about the relationship of 2 things you're comparing. It can be written in 3 different ways: as a fraction, with a colon, or with the word to. when you compare them, you want to write your ratios as fractions with a common denominator. And when you look at the different types, there are 3 different types of ratios. They are a part-to-part ratio, a part-to-whole ratio, or a whole-to-part ratio. Okay, now what I'm going to do is we're going to go over to our practice section. Okay. Looking at our practice section, let's read this story problem. Josie and Joe each make a candy mix. Josie has, I'm going to circle the numbers, 3 cups of chocolate chips and 2 cups of candy corn. Joe has 5 cups of chocolate chips and 3 cups of candy corn. What is each person's ratio of chocolate chips to candy corn? That's the question. Whose ratio is bigger? You're going to compare. And what type of ratio is this? Okay. By the way, if we can also take a moment, you want to put here where it says journal, we are on 11-2 and we are taking notes. That's your first revision. And remember, we want to go back and revisit these notes 5 times. Okay, so now, back to our question. So the first thing we're answering is, so this is question 1, question 2, and question 3. So the first thing it says is, what is each person's ratio of chocolate chips to candy corn? So we're going to start off, we have Josie and we have Joe. So here is Josie, here is Joe. And we're doing chocolate chips to candy corn. How many cups does Josie have of chocolate chips? Daphne?
3.
3. So 3 chocolate chips, 2, or colon, or if you want to make it a fraction, however you want to do it, to how many cups of candy corn? Shayla?
2.
2, right. So chocolate chips to candy corn. Now how many does Joe have? How many cups of chocolate chips does Joe have? Riley?
Joe has 5 cups of chocolate chips.
5 cups of chocolate chips. To how many candy corn does he have? William?
Yes, 3 cups.
3 cups. Good. So we have 3 to 2 and 5 to 3. All right, so then we've finished question number 1. Question number 2, whose ratio is bigger? So remember what it said for us to do. We have to write them as fractions, and then we have to give them common denominators, okay? So our first one would be 3 over 2 compared to Joe's, which is 5 over 3. Do you see how I took these and I just wrote them as fractions? Okay? Now we need to find our common denominator. What is a common denominator between 2 and 3? Maria?
The common denominator is
6. Very good. So 6, 6. 2 goes into 6 3 times. 3 times 3 is, class? 9. 3 goes into 6 how many times? 2. 2 times 5?
10.
Is 9 pieces of 6 smaller or bigger than 10 pieces of 6?
Smaller.
Smaller. So this one is bigger. So Joe has a bigger ratio. And class, what type of ratio? Is this a part-to-part, part-to-whole, whole-to-part? What kind is it? Noah Megabat.
It is a part-to-part.
Part-to-part, because you're comparing one type of candy to another type of candy, right? If you were comparing one type of candy to all the candy, class, what would that be? Part to whole, right. But this one is part to part. Remember to go back and review the notes if you need to, and you can ask me questions, you can email me. Have a fantastic day.